Today's episode is brought to you by CASSA, the Canadian Association of School System Administrators. If you've been listening to Education Matters, you know that one of my central themes is exploring Canadian identity through education and connecting the dots between leadership, policy, and meaningful change. And so this is exactly what CASSA does. They bring together superintendents and system leaders from coast to coast to coast across Canada to tackle the biggest challenges in public education, with a sharp focus on equity, student success, and collaboration. Learn more at CASSA, that's CASSA-ACGCS.ca.
The other thing is that we still assume that 9 to 3:30 is the way that we should educate children, and that we should take a break at the end of June so that kids could go home to the farm and farm during the summer and come back. We're way past that. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so there should be some freedom. You know, I really believe that provincial governments should say you need so many days of school a year. How you schedule that is entirely up to you as a school division. Do it the way that you want.
Welcome to another episode of the Education Matters podcast. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Since Canada is a country without a federal Department of Education, national coherence has to be built, not just legislated. And for years, one of the few places where that unity has taken shape is at the annual CASSA Leadership Conference, which is a unique gathering of school system administrators from all across Canada's school systems. I myself have attended CASSA many times in the past, and it remains one of the most diverse and impactful spaces for Canadian education leaders to gather. That's why I'm especially excited to sit down with today's guest, Reg Klassen. Reg is the Executive Director of CASSA, which stands for the Canadian Association of School System Administrators. But his story in education spans over 36 years, from a guidance counselor to classroom teacher, school principal to superintendent, and eventually Chief Superintendent of Frontier School Division in Manitoba. He's led schools and systems in a wide variety of communities and contexts, and as you'll be able to tell by this conversation, he certainly leads with a steady hand and a clear moral compass. Reg believes that the core purpose of education is to prepare students to participate fully in a democracy, one where people take the time to discuss critical issues, debate with each other, and seek solutions that benefit the whole of society. It's evident that Reg has a deep conviction in the power of education, and it shows up in how he leads, how he listens, and how he seeks to build community across Canada. In this episode, we talk about what it means to lead public education systems in a country as vast and as diverse as Canada. Reg shares his reflections on building bridges across provincial boundaries, his hopes for developing a stronger Canadian education identity, and why gatherings like CASSA matter more now than ever. We also explore the evolving role of school system leaders and what's required to lead with integrity in today's landscape of complexity, polarization, and change. This is a conversation about leadership, vision, and the slow but vital work of shaping a national identity, one conversation, one district, one province, and one learner at a time. So let's get into my conversation with Reg Klassen. Reg Klassen, welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
It finds me in Winnipeg, Jason, and I appreciate being invited, so thank you very much for the invite.
Anytime, I'm looking forward to this. So Reg, we typically start with an introduction, so I would have given you an introduction by now, but can you give the audience a sense of what you're up to these days?
Currently, I work as the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of School System Administrators, and that's a part-time job after I retired from superintendency, and it's a long title referred to in the acronym as CASSA. Basically, it is all of the superintendent organizations across the country. About 95% of those organizations belong to CASSA, and we, even though we answer to provincial and territorial masters as education is designed in this country, we look and work hard at sharing our journey as organizations with each other and try to be a national voice on educational issues.
Well, excellent. And I've been to CASSA events many times in the past, and it's certainly been one of the themes of this podcast to explore this education identity of Canada, because we don't have a national system. So I'm very much looking forward to talking to you about that and CASSA's role in that, because I believe it's one of the few, if not the only organization that really attempts to pull together a consensus and a community of senior leaders from across the country. But before we get into all of that, Reg, I would like to learn more about you, and I'm sure the audience would too. So can we start with where and when did you grow up?
Oh, I was raised in Saskatchewan, about I would say about 80 kilometers north of Saskatoon. That's where I grew up on a farm. My parents were farmers, and then found myself on my way to Ontario for a year in a voluntary service assignment, and then came back to school here in Winnipeg and ended up staying. My wife is from Winnipeg, and we made our home in Manitoba. We haven't always lived in Winnipeg, but our home has always been Manitoba. So that's kind of how it came to be.
Were you the first of your family to go to school, go to university?
Yes, I'm the oldest of six children, so I was the first. Neither of my parents went to university. I remember my dad came back to farm after grade 9. He always told the story of how he was needed on the farm, and I remember the day vividly when he did some upgrade courses, and the day that he received his final marks for those upgrade courses and was granted a grade 12. And I remember how excited and how happy he was. I didn't realize the significance it would have on my memory at the time, but that was a big deal. And now when I think back all these years later, I kind of go, yeah, that's important for people, that those people that left school that didn't finish grade 12, then go back and get grade 12. That's a big deal. So that kind of had a bit of an imprint in my work in education.
I feel, and I think this is a product of a good education system and a good society, is that a lot of us, especially younger generations, don't recognize how important school was to a bunch of folks that just couldn't go. My grandmother used to tell me a story. When she was in grade 6, they couldn't afford to send her to where the middle school was for 7, 8, and then high school. And she was a reader. I think I've said on this podcast before, she read Dante, in Italian. And that stain of never being able to go to school never left her. She always wanted to, and that's why she pushed my father and us to all go to school. But that was wonderful that you remember that. How old were you about?
Well, I think I was in probably around grade 1, maybe grade 2, somewhere in there.
Quite young.
Yeah, but young. And I mean, I was never successful at school. Let's say that. They asked me to do grade 2 twice because I was such a great student. They wanted to use me as an example. So, and I struggled in school, and it wasn't until I graduated high school and went on to post-secondary education, when I started to do my education degree, that I understood that, I had some significant kind of ADHD, and I was miserable in school. I disliked it, but what I didn't do was quit, because I knew that my parents, given my experience that I've just described, and my mother had the same kind of belief that education was pretty darn important. I didn't quit. I knew I couldn't. It wasn't allowed, even though it was agonizing at times for me.
What was your informal education like? And so the way I like to get at that question is, like, how did you play as a child?
Lots of creative stuff. We were on the farm. I was the oldest of 6 kids, but by the time I was 5, there were four of us running around. So, there were four of us that played together, even though the youngest of those four was, maybe a little small at the time. But then as we got older, so lots of games, lots of, you pretend you're the dad and you're the mom and you're the kids, or I pretended I was a farmer a lot of time, and my brother and I took turns. Who's going to be the horse that's dragging the rake around because we're playing farmer, and so lots of freedom. I had a lot of freedom as a 5-year-old. There's pictures of me on top of the stack of bales with my dog, my German Shepherd dog, because we had a massive garden. It was shared with not only my mom and dad, but my grandparents, because for a while we lived on the same yard as they did. And, I had freedom to go into the garden and pick what I wanted when it got to be fall. So I always had a pocket full of peas, or I was dragging a carrot I had just pulled out. And, there was a cow pasture, and I often went out there with my dog at the age of 5 before I went to school, and the dog was always with me. My dad tells the story of they couldn't find me one time, and so he went to the middle of the yard and whistled, knowing that the dog would come, and then following the direction back from which the dog came. And there I was in the middle of a slough trying to figure out if I should leave my boots behind or keep going. So I had a great deal of freedom. And so when the yellow van, in a sense, showed up in the yard and took me away, it felt very much like they had locked me up.
Right.
Because I was an outdoor kid. Like I wanted to be out there. So, and that was school. And so that transition to school wasn't a very good transition. It was just suddenly one day Mom was making sure I was clean and dressed nicely, and I was carrying a lunch bag, and off I went. I had some notion of what was going to happen, but and then I found out, that school for me wasn't easy, and school made me feel stupid. And I've always remembered that, how we can make children feel in school. We have to be mindful of that, so mindful of that we can make them feel lesser than in a matter of moments. And that I really believe that's a significant piece of education.
That's really interesting. How did you overcome that?
Oh,
because I don't think a lot of kids do, right? Like I know a lot of friends and family for the same reason, and then they've been very successful in life because, in fact, they weren't stupid. They just felt they were.
I never had any difficulty speaking. I was not afraid to get up in front of people. I just, even as a grade 1, grade 2 kid, that was never a fear of mine. I could read. I often, in the early grades, was the guy who was the narrator because I could read and I had a loud voice, and I was the narrator in whatever school play we might have, or I was in the play. That for me wasn't the fear. The fear for me was going into my brain and finding the answer.
Fear of getting it wrong.
That was a bit of a jumbled mess in there. And, some people can go and almost do a filing system through their brain and, there's the name of that person. Not me. I couldn't remember that. And so lots of strategies in terms of avoidance of being asked questions in class, always deflecting, lots of humor, lots of jokes, and then procrastination, because it was hard to get started, hard to get organized. It was difficult to, and then there's a perfectionist thing in there that creates another problem, that you can't move on if it's messy, or you got to start over, or it's got to be almost perfect. And so those are the things that I had to overcome. And it was about my mid-20s that I figured it out in school, and I went, and it was when I was in my mid-20s that I came to the realization that I was not stupid. Because school had made me feel unintelligent, and
quite a burden to bear for that long.
And so I think about other kids. I look at my grandkids, And some of them are exactly the same way. It turns out the DNA moved along, and yeah. And for those kids in school, they have other skills. And what we don't do in school is look at all the skills that children have and work well. We're really good at rewarding those people who can remember details and put them down on paper, or who are the ones who can pull things out of their head that read them and remember them. And some of us don't do that well. I can speak, but writing for me, I find agonizing. It always has been. And yet it's ironic that I have a job where I do a lot of writing in emails and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a sport as well, right? The more you do it, the better you get. The more confident you get. The more you want to do it. The more you do it.
Yeah.
So, can you take me into how this informed your teaching practice? Like, what grades did you teach? When did you start teaching? What was that like for you?
Well, it took me quite a while. I got a Bachelor of Theology, and then I got a Bachelor of Arts, and then I worked for 2 years, and then I went back into education, and really only started teaching when I was, 29, I think. That's when I started my career. My first job was as a guidance counselor, quarter time, resource teacher, quarter time, and half-time classroom teacher. And I had no training in guidance counseling other than life experience.
Sure.
And no training in resource. And so I leaned heavily on some good friends of mine who were, one, a guidance counselor that I knew through playing fastball. And so that's what I did. And I was in a school that was a 7 to 12, and they had never had a guidance counselor or a resource teacher. So, 98% of those students went on to post-secondary education. So it wasn't a school that was used to accommodating students that struggled. And so for me, I learned very quickly the arguments of how to help teachers see their way through accommodating students that might not be able to do the work as they've designed it. How do you create other ways in which they can demonstrate to you they understand the content, because there's more than one way. And that was hard for some teachers. And so, that's where I started. You fake it till you make it. And I flew by the seat of my pants, and worked hard at it. And then 3 years later, I was a vice principal for 2 years, and then principal of the school. And that all happened much faster and almost by surprise. I never expected that would be a part of my career. So.
Can you describe the most inspiring thing you've seen as an educator, principal, superintendent?
I had a student, and she was the youngest of 3 daughters in her family, and her mother and grandmother really wanted her to, because she really struggled in school. They really said, why are you doing this? You can come work for the company. And they had a company and they were doing well, and come work for the company. And and I worked exceedingly hard to keep her in school and help her be successful. And in those days, she was doing modular mathematics with me. It was outside the classroom. We were trying to get her credits. It was kind of like distance learning at the time. And we got the credit. And she went on and she completed that. I was always going to the math teacher for help. How do you explain this? Give me another way of explaining this, because I was losing her. And then she passed and ended up graduating. And, that was a success story. So it was about, I would say at least 10 years later, maybe 8 years later, something like that, somewhere in there. I was a superintendent at the time, and I was in this small little diner with some other superintendents. We had a day-long meeting, and we were there for lunch. And all of a sudden, I heard this voice behind me, Mr. Klassen. And I turn around, and it's this young woman who was my student, who we struggled with for a couple of years, but did graduate. And she said, guess what? I'm getting married. She was getting married to a local farmer, had a 5-year-old son, so she was going to become an instant mother. And she said to me with a big smile on her face, she said, "I'm working at the school as an educational assistant, and guess what I'm helping kids with? Mathematics." And I just remember that story. I still get goosebumps on me when I share that story. It was just, we don't know as educators the impact we have. We rarely find out. And that was the story that reminded me that, I was close to quitting with this kid. Like, this was tough. And every day I'd have to, build her up and tell her not to quit. And I had to ward off her grandmother, who was pretty tough lady, because she had built a company by herself. And she had pretty clear goals of what should happen. And yeah, there it is. Like, we just don't quit on human beings, and hang in there and watch what happens. It's not always this wonderful a story, but yeah. And so that's a fairly powerful story that sticks in my mind that I will never lose.
Yeah, I wish I wish teachers had the ability to kind of track their students more, like, and get that feedback, because we know the impact is much larger than what we hear. So in a perfect world, teachers would have that perfectly closed loop of all the folks they've impacted. But that's a wonderful story. Can you describe the qualities you most admire in great teachers or great principals?
I think the ability to build relationships. And in all the years that I've interviewed people, one of the things that I really value is a skill to build relationships. And I'll go so far as to say I'm not as worried about you being able to teach the content, because I can probably help you learn the content better and teach it better. But it's much more difficult, in my opinion, to help you learn how to build good relationships. And so I've been burnt a couple times when I've made hires and listened to people that are really, really keen on this person because he or she has won all kinds of awards with regards to their ability and the content, and yet when we hired them, they weren't as great at building relationships with kids. So building relationships. The other thing is the ability to listen as actively as you want to share your viewpoint. And the ability to listen, not only listen, but ask questions that actually take the person who's speaking deeper than they first imagined they would be able to share. To find that level of understanding, to make the other person really feel heard. And then another thing that I value is when you go into a classroom and you see a happy teacher, you see a happy person who is enjoying the work that they do, and their students are enjoying being there with them, whatever that might be. And so there is, when we do that, I'm not going to say that the curriculum's automatically going to follow and happen. You still have to pay attention to that. But that's going to happen a lot easier. I mean, if I think of the teachers that were excited every day to see me in class, regardless of what I brought into that door, that was a good place to be. And so I think those are some of the characteristics that I think are important. And I see it over and over and over again. You see teachers that have retired and they're still connected with a lot of the kids that they were with because they just built up that kind of relationship. Yeah.
What would you say are the most important things for parents to understand about their children's education?
Oh, most important thing about
like education can from obviously I've been involved in it pretty much excuse me, even before my career began. My parents are teachers, right? So I just grew up in this atmosphere. But then as a parent, sometimes it really does feel like that school and that community in the school during the day is a black box. We don't know what's going on there. So is there any kind of, I don't know if advice, but what are the things that parents should know about their child's educational journey?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is go find out who the teacher is. Let them know who you are, and let them know what you're thinking, and talk about your child with them, and hear what they have to say. What have they observed? As teachers, we're not always the best at hearing our parents and what they know of their children, and they usually know quite a bit. We may not agree with them, but they usually know quite a bit about their kid, and that's pretty valuable information, and vice versa. And, and not everybody has the chance, but I don't think there's anything wrong. Sometimes it unnerves teachers, but it really shouldn't, to volunteer in a classroom and just to, not to volunteer with your kid, but to volunteer with other kids and just be see what's going on. I remember sitting in a dressing room with getting ready to go play hockey, and a guy looked across at me. It was when I was superintendent of a school division, and he said, I went and volunteered in my daughter's kindergarten classroom. And he got really quiet, and all he did was just shake his head. He said, Reg, unbelievable. I don't ever want that job. He said, those teachers are amazing. And that changed his opinion completely. That one day of volunteering, of the busyness of the classroom, of what's going on. So I think parents need to, it's important that they have understand that there is, like, it feels like a million things going on in that classroom, and teachers are, the statistics on how many questions they answer in a day is phenomenal. And to understand that, like, I don't have that as a superintendent. I don't have that in my job. I don't answer that many questions or give that many directions or have that many decisions to make in one day. And those decisions are all important because they all have a little impact on the children you work with. And so to have a sense of that, and to know, too, that your teacher isn't robotic. Your teacher is, in fact, human. And humans mess up. And we need to forgive that. We need to work that through. We now hold teachers to a higher standard, which is fine. But to hold them to a standard of perfection is incorrect.
I think that's some of the best advice to that question. Now I'm going to go sit in on my kids' grade 7 and 8 classes next year.
Good for you.
But it's true.
He'll love you for being in grade 7 and 8.
yeah, just embarrass the heck out of them, right?
Yeah.
No, but I think it's super important in those early years, especially. I mean, grade 7 and 8, those classrooms are wild too. I don't think people understand. Like, teachers are dealing with kids getting into their hormonal stages of life and puberty, and how crazy that can be. But I think that's really great advice. I actually, after hearing you say it, wish there were formal ways that we built as a system to.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Like, to encourage as much as possible that at some point in every year, every parent just, comes and observes. It doesn't have to be their kid's class. It could be their kids' class in combination with like a school visit, right? Like you and I have done probably thousands of times, which are so instructive to understand, everything that you just mentioned. So thanks for that. So Reg, maybe we'll get into some questions that take us more towards the work you're doing with CASSA, but help us understand how challenging it really is to create sustainable changes in a school system. And then, feel free to even take that nationally in terms of, the challenges that we have as a Canadian education system.
Well, it is significantly challenging. As a principal for many years and as a superintendent for many years, I was always one of the people that was in charge of bringing about the change that we wanted to have happen. And it's easy to start. So I'll share a story. In one school division I was in, we moved with a third of our school division, one area and some schools into a new literacy program. And without a doubt, we started in September. We had prepped all the teachers, and off we went. And we got to October and into November, and we had an implementation dip where things kind of fell off the rails and things went down. I think it's Fullen's theory of implementation dip. And without a doubt, it happened. And so I called my superintendents together and said, hey, we've got to meet every Friday morning. We got to make sure that we meet and push the boulders aside. Those are the obstacles. What are they? We got to talk about them. And then the following year, we did another third of our school division. And no word of a lie, even though we had already gone through this, the same thing happened. We had another implementation dip. This time we were a little more prepared. We recognized it a little bit sooner. And then the third year, we did the whole school division in terms of this new literacy program, and it was a K-3. And this time we were ready. We had everybody lined up in a sense that we're just waiting for the implementation dip. And sure enough, there it was. Even though we were in our third year, it happens. And so I think it's important for people to realize that the start is easy. It's shortly after that where the implementation dip. So we had PLCs every week for our teachers, and we had a number of schools that said, well, that's pretty often. Can we do every 2 weeks? And I was relentless. I said, no, you got to go every week, because that every 2 weeks would have been an implementation dip continued. And so that's the difficulty. That's the difficulty of initiating something. I really believe that education is a antiquated beast in many ways that has this massive structure to it and that marches on. And if we listen to each other speak as administrators, we talk about the inability to change what we do. I took over a school as principal, and some of the courses were semesterized and some of the courses weren't. But our grade 7s, 8s, and 9s were doing 35-minute classes a day. They had 10 classes a day. It was insanity. And they'd go home every day with homework from every class. But our high school kids had a different schedule. So I did some research about which schedule is better. All year long, people argued, well, kids are going to forget if they take math in the first semester and then they have to take math in the second semester the following year. They're going to forget everything. It turns out research tells us that most of what you're going to forget is done in the first 6 weeks anyways. So summer holidays, we'd need to shorten those. And then there was no research that actually indicated one schedule was light years ahead of the other. What the research shows is that the most significant thing in the classroom is the quality of your instructor. That's it. And so I changed the schedule in order to make it, and we just went all year long, and we had a 6-day cycle, and we went four classes in a 6-day cycle and tried to balance it off. But the cycle we had was that math and language got to go all year long, and everybody else was semesterized because math and language had made the argument that it's continual. Well, I'm not going to dispute that. But it's not quite as terrible as they might think if we go semesterized. But we didn't. We went to an all-year-long schedule for all courses. And it changed the balance of the school. It just changed it. But sometimes when we listen to bus schedules or teacher schedules or those kinds of things, we have to keep in mind that education is about children that we're teaching in the classroom. And so to talk first of schedule or the inconvenience for teachers is the wrong place to start. And I think education has done that automatically. I think that's almost a default already without even thinking. And so if we stop and pause, always ask, what's best for kids? We know the answer. It's inconvenient. And then we need to make the move.
So, you've had this really interesting career, and now you're moving from, school division in Manitoba to the executive director of CASSA. And I think this gives you a pretty unique, let's call it perch to look at, Canadian education writ large. What What are you trying to do in CASA? What's the mission of CASA, and how are you helping facilitate that?
Well, our purpose is to strengthen the capacity of senior school system leaders through national dialogue and professional learning. That's our purpose. And every organization across the country or in each province, and Quebec and Ontario have more than one because of English and Catholic and French. Every organization across the country faces the same problems. The problem is that we never face them at the same time. There's always somebody who's really getting clawed back in funding, somebody else who's got bills that are coming in that really seem to restrict the rights of individuals. Then there are others who don't have the infrastructure, i.e. need more schools, but schools aren't being built. And we all face those issues at different times. And so part of that dialogue is to share those experiences and make sure that we learn from each other. And so that's part of it. The other thing that we do is that we say that our vision is equity and excellence in education for every learner. And I think that's important in terms of the equity. How do we create equity for all learners? And that's not just areas based on socioeconomic status. That's in the classroom based on individual needs of learners. That's throughout the system, and that's not easy to establish. Equity is not easy to establish. And not everybody wants equity. It's really hard for those of us who have lots to give some of that up or allow others to have some of it in some way so that they can have the same opportunity or advantages that we have. And that's hard in a democracy and in a society, we as human beings. Then our beliefs are that we really believe that the success for each student, we promote individual and collective learning for our members. We have a responsibility to initiate and participate in dialogue on educational matters of national significance. And that's happening more for us. I know that we've participated in mental health conversation for a while. I've just been invited to participate in a national program where we're developing K-12 template standards for substance use and abuse, and trying to create something that school divisions and schools and teachers can use in terms of the education of substance, because that's changed. The laws in and around that have changed. So that's one thing. And then we believe it's essential to communicate and collaborate with educational and community partners. And so we're doing a lot of that. And that's a way of us ensuring the excellence and equity in publicly funded education across Canada. So to achieve that, we've created 3 committees. One is a professional learning committee, and they spend a lot of time looking after our conference in July, which is every July this year in St. John's. We have a governance and operations committee because we want to make sure that as an organization we have good governance and our operations are strong. And then we have communications and engagement. And so we're proud of the fact that we're close to producing a video that explains what CASSA is all about. We hope to launch that at our conference coming up. So that's kind of an exciting piece as well. And but I'll tell you this, Jason, this is not easy because the entire board, I'm only part-time, and our entire board is doing this off the side of their desk. They have full-time jobs and they don't get paid for this. And so it's their commitment to education, their commitment to a national voice in education that makes this possible. And that's pretty remarkable. So we have educators that care passionately about what's happening in our country for education. And we are made up of the people that are the final decision makers who help their boards make those decisions.
Mm.
And so I think it's imperative that our voice is heard across the country, that we participate in national dialogue in order to give some guidance as to where education needs to go based on what we know from where it's been.
Well, I mean, I think CASSA, like I said at the onset here, is one of the few organizations that is trying to facilitate this kind of national conversation. And I know you have lots of great partners there. For folks listening to this, this will be published in plenty of time to get to the conference if at all possible, because it's really a collection of leaders from across the country, and there are not many opportunities to engage with those folks on a variety of issues. Reg, as you look to the significant challenges that are coming our way, not only socio-political, which are tremendous, but also technological, how do you see CASSA helping districts navigate what I would consider, and we can debate this if you'd like, a real necessary sea change in the way we train teachers, in the way we train principals, in the way we do school for students?
It's a beautiful question, Jason. I remember when I was superintendent and working with some deans of education here in Manitoba, I said to them, I don't need you to have them go through 5 years of education. I need you to do it in 2, because the teaching of students, i.e. the curriculum, what I want them to do with our literacy program at the early years, I can teach them that. And I really pushed them hard. I said, we don't have enough, our teachers graduating don't have enough tools in the toolbox to deal with what is coming into their classroom today. And we need to educate them in a better way, and that is we spend a lot of time teaching them the curriculum, and in fact, long before we get to curriculum, they need to know how to manage students and connect with them and invite them into this content world. And the truth is that teachers are in a position where whatever they explain in the classroom, kids can find online faster than the teacher can explain, and that just changes everything. And so how do we manage that? So I really believe that we can do a better job for our teachers in preparing them to come into the classroom in terms of dealing with students. And then the other thing is that we still assume that 9 to 3:30 is the way that we should educate children. And that we should take a break at the end of June so that kids could go home to the farm and farm during the summer and come back. We're way past that. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so there should be some freedom. I really believe that provincial governments should say you need so many days of school a year. How you schedule that is entirely up to you as a school division. Do it the way that you want. And businesses have an impact on that. Here in Manitoba, businesses lobbied so that school starts after the long weekend because they wanted the financial rewards of not having families go back to school prior to the long weekend. They wanted the financial rewards of that last weekend of spending. Fair enough. We have to take those things into account. But what would school look like if we could design it differently and make some really creative changes? And what would understanding content be like? We seemed not to learn a lot during COVID. The only thing that seemed to come out of COVID, that's a for sure, is that kids come to school less. So what does that tell us?
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell us? And so I think we really need to do that. And so those are a couple of things there. When I look into the future, I know that we at our CASSA conference in July, we're going to talk about AI. We've got a number of keynote speakers coming to speak about AI, and that's big. That's coming, and we're all aware of it. We need to learn how to use it because it's not going to go away. It's here to stay, and we need to move from there. So one of the things that happens in education is that we're afraid to make a mistake, and that is so ironic in the sense that we're constantly encouraging our students to give it a try, and too often we punish them for mistakes when they try. But it's okay to make a mistake because that's how we learn. And yet, if the school makes a mistake, we as parents are all over them. And so we need to engage parents more. And I find parents to be of the mind that, well, I went through it, so my kids can go through it, and I survived. That just doesn't work. Just doesn't work. So I think there's a lot of things we can do. We can be creative about a lot of things in terms of how we offer up education. And I think we should change how we prepare our teachers. I think there's a lot of things we need to do, and we're not at a place anymore where I believe they need 5 years. I'm not sure here in Manitoba. I think I would challenge that.
Well, Reg, I know you're pretty early in your tenure as executive at CASSA, but I also know that you've seen Canadian education pretty much in every province, and I know you have connections with superintendents in every province. What would you say are the key elements to what we can describe as Canadian education? What makes Canadian education Canadian? What makes it special on the world stage?
Well, I think I would start, and maybe everybody would say this, but I think I would start with the dedicated human beings that are totally committed to education of our children. I would say that is uniquely, don't know if that's uniquely Canadian, but it certainly is a part of the Canadian fabric in that there's a great level of commitment. The other piece, and we're dangerously close of sliding away from this, but I do believe that here in Canada, that we still believe that education is about educating our children to take a full-fledged citizen position in our democracy. And we talk a lot about test scores and literacy scores and mathematics scores, and one government that follows a change in government always says that the past government, we were losing, and yet when we look at some of the statistics, we show that we're slowly increasing in that, and so I think that we need to be mindful of the fact that how do we create good citizenry to take their place in a democracy that is has some real challenges, some real dangers, because there's a lot of countries in the world that don't believe in democracy, and so I think if we really believe in that, democracy, I really believe, is the only thing that's going to actually help us maintain the kind of equity that we're trying to do, and that is our healthcare, our education, all of those things that we as Canadians cherish. So I think our education has to be about that. If we totally focus on content, which I'm not going to say isn't important, it's very important because it helps you be a good citizen. But if that's where we get overzealous in our focus, we're going to lose sight of what education is all about. And I have seen a great many people who don't have a grade 12 be very successful in this world and contribute back as citizens that go above and beyond what some of the most educated have done. And so I think that we really need to talk a little bit more about what that means. What does it mean to bring up young citizens to become adult citizens in a democracy? What does that look like?
Wonderfully, wonderfully put. And another theme of this podcast for sure. So, Reg, always my penultimate question. If you had a magic and all-powerful education czar wand, what would you do with it? And right now, because of your role in CASSA, like your wand works all throughout Canada. What would you do with it?
Well, I think one of the things I would do is I guess I would make it so that there was more people interested in teaching. We're short on teachers. We're short on teachers, and we're just short. And people are scrambling to find educators to fill classrooms, and that's a real challenge. The other thing that goes with that is I think I would. I think my wand would make it so that we stopped adding whatever we think we need to do for kids, whether it be health something or something else or whatever, adding it onto the school. Our people in our schools are exhausted. They have too many things that they need to look at that are administrivia to make sure that it's all taken care of, and not enough time to build those relationships that lead to really good instruction. And we have educational assistants throughout our country, and they do marvelous work, and work with some of the most challenging kids and really help those kids. What I would do is I would give all of those people time for more education so that they would feel not just like they're feeling a little bit like they're looking after somebody, but that they have a more of a background in education on being able to do more teaching in the classroom and leading. I think we're past the point where we can put 30 kids into a classroom with one teacher. We need a multitude of adults in a classroom working with all of the variety of students that we have. And so I think that's what I would do. And then, of course, I would clean up I would clean up all of the buildings that are inappropriate for kids to go to school in. And I'm really referring here to what I've seen in many of our First Nation communities, where the federal government has been slow to build schools that are appropriate. And I'll give you one example. When it gets down to be minus 35 up north, and it's there, that temperature for 2 or 3 days, and the furnaces are going full blast and working as well as they can, and we still close the school because it's too cold in the school, that's inappropriate. That's inappropriate. But, because it's on a First Nation community, we're slow to react. We're slow to act. And so we need to look at that. And that's an equity thing. And I think my wand would create a whole brand new level of equity for all of our children across the land. And then finally, I would say that we start education as soon as a child is born, with their moms or their dads or their parents, whoever it might be, that we begin that education, that we create the space for them to be so that mom and dad can go to work, that we spend whatever the money is from 0 to 5 so that we don't have to spend 10 times that much from 15 to 80.
Well, sir, if I find this magic wand, you'll be the first one to get it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate
wonderful answer. And I think you kind of nailed all the key points there that we need. The thing that's always amazed me is the knowledge is out there. What we need to do is just a collective will, and that's what I hope we can continue to build here and doing this work and the work you're doing in CASSA. So with that, Reg, the last question. What book, podcast, video, movie, music album have you really enjoyed recently that you would recommend to the audience?
Let's see. Well, I've read I read a book on B.B. King. It was a biography, and that's not really the book I want to talk about. But I was amazed in that book how long he toiled as a entertainer and wasn't recognized by, in a sense, the mainstream. And he did show after show after show, hundreds of shows a year for a long part of his career, and just worked, because he was black, he didn't get it. And it was only later in his career where, a different group of individuals, people, recognized his music, and he got to the fame that he was. But he was always this phenomenal musician, and that level of perseverance. And in there are stories about him dealing with the racism that he constantly had to deal with. So that's one. Another one is that I've just finished reading, and actually I wrote a little article on it in in my commentary, and I can't remember if it's, I think it's in our new magazine or a recent newsletter, but it's called Legacy. And it's written by Mark and Craig Kielburger and Martin Luther King Jr. III and his wife. And the book surprised me in that they talked about legacy. And we all think about legacy as leaving this monument, large sum of money, et cetera, et cetera. And they really talk a lot about what does it mean to leave a legacy, build a legacy on a daily basis with each interaction that you have with a human being. And that legacy isn't about something at the end of your life. Legacy is about how we act on a daily basis with other human beings. And how do they remember us? It's almost a little bit, like servant leadership, which is, in essence, is the person better off after you've been with them than before you came? And so that struck me, that whole notion of thinking a little bit differently about legacy and working at legacy on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book that I've also read.
Okay.
Because I know Craig a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful person from all the interactions I've had with him. And also another awesome connection. One of the first CDs I ever got was a Best of B.B. King album, and I felt like my brain melted when I heard that guitar.
He's so good.
He's so good.
So good.
Oh, Reg, thank you so much. This wonderful conversation, and I really hope this does give folks a little taste of what's happening at CASSA. We're going to have more podcasts with some of your keynote speakers and other members, so folks get a true sense of the diversity of voices there. But thank you, and I hope this encourages folks to get to the conference in July.
We look forward to it. And I would encourage people, when you see this, if you want to go, sign up, because we're getting lots of interest, and St. John's is a beautiful place to be.
The best place, especially in July.
Yes, very much.
Thanks, Reg.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
This podcast is recorded on the Territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Until next time.